Hello, and welcome. I have in front of me an edition of Indeed Playboy from 1974. And it does have a thing in here. I didn't realize it was the concluding part of a two-part article. Maybe I'll have to find the other part, but it is about Richard Nixon and all the president's men. So I think, and I'm not going to do this all at once because it's a very long thing, but I'm going to read some of it. I am. Synopsis. Before June 17, 1972, the two young Washington reporters had never worked on a story together. In the months that followed, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward scooped the Washington press corps with a series of articles linking the committee for the re-election of the president and the White House itself to the Watergate break-in and to other illegal campaign practices as well. By exhaustive detective work, the reporters established that a secret fund of cash in the office of Maurice Stans, former Secretary of Commerce and chief fundraiser for the CRP, was the source for payments to the Watergate burglars. Payments from this fund could be authorized by Stans himself, John Mitchell, Nixon's former Attorney General, and the head of CRP, Jeb Magruder, Mitchell's deputy, Herbert Kalmbach, Nixon's personal lawyer, and a fifth man who, the reporters were led to believe, worked in the White House. Bernstein and Woodward also revealed a systematic campaign of sabotage against Democrats carried out by dirty trickster Donald Zagretti, who reported to presidential appointments Secretary Dwight Chapman. Most of Bernstein and Woodward's breaks were a result of persevering on leads that the FBI and other reporters had overlooked. But a few critical leads were provided by former CRP Treasurer Hugh Sloan and several still unidentified sources in the Justice Department, the White House, and CRP. Perhaps the most enigmatic of these was a highly placed administration official known to the reporters as Deep Throat. His position was so sensitive that Woodward could contact him only by such prearranged signals as moving a flower pot on his balcony and their meeting with him in an underground garage. Deep Throat was talkative, but never gave directly incriminating details. He only, confirmed stories, and he had never given Woodward false information. From the beginning, the White House, through Press Secretary Ron Ziegler, flatly denied everything and attempted to discredit the Post. But the reporters were supported at every step by the Post's executive director Benjamin Bradley, managing editor Howard Simons, metropolitan editor Herod Rosenfeld, and city editor Barry Sussman. It was shortly before the November election that Bernstein and Woodward wrote their most significant and troublesome story. The account stated that in addition to Stans, Mitchell, Magruder, and Kalmbach, four of the five officials who had authorized disbursements from the secret fund in Stans' office, the fifth, apparently confirmed by Sloan, Deep Throat, and an FBI agent, was Nixon's chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman. The response was immediate. Ziegler accused the Post of shabby journalism and claimed that Haldeman's name had not been mentioned in grand jury testimony, as the story claimed. Then Sloan appeared to back off, telling the reporters they had misinterpreted him. The reporters had made a bad mistake and at one point considered resigning. Finally, Deep Throat confirmed Haldeman's involvement, but said the reporters had been wrong about the grand jury testimony. You put the investigation back months, Deep Throat told Woodward. The fall elections passed, and there were no new breaks, no more big stories, and the Post's reputation suffered. According to Bradley, the long, dry spell was pure anguish. He pressed the reporters to come up with something fresh on Watergate to salvage the newspaper's credibility. Bernstein and Woodward became desperate for new information and new sources as the date for the trial of the Watergate burglars approached. So that is the synopsis. And here we have the article at the start of it, because I can't do this all in one go. On one late November Saturday night, a Post editor asked for a word with Woodward. In a deserted section of the newsroom, one of his neighbors had told him that his aunt was on a grand jury. His neighbor thought it was the jury on Watergate. She'd made some remark about knowing all about it. She's a Republican, but she says she really hates Nixon now. My neighbor thinks she wants to talk. A few days later, the editor handed Woodward a slip of paper with the woman's name and address. Bernstein and Woodward went to Rosenfield, who, funny, I've got this sitting, who seemed to like the idea of a visit, but suspended final judgment until he had checked with Bradley for a policy decision. Bradley asked the Post lawyers. Bernstein and Woodward consulted the Post library copy of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Grand jurors took an oath to keep secret both their deliberations and the testimony before them, but the burden of secrecy, it appeared, was on the juror. There seemed to be nothing in the law that forbade anyone to ask questions. The lawyers agreed, but urged extreme caution in making any approaches. They recommended that the reporter simply ask the woman if she wanted to talk. Bradley was nervous. No beating anyone over the head, no pressure, none of that cajoling, he instructed Woodward and Bernstein. He got up from behind his desk, pointed his finger. I'm serious about that, particularly you, Bernstein. Be subtle for once in your life. The next morning, the reporters drove across town, knocked at the woman's door, and identified themselves. She invited them inside. They did not mention the grand jury, and simply that they had heard she knew something about Watergate. It's a mess, I know that, the woman said, but how would I know anything about it except what I read in the paper? It took 10 minutes to figure out that the woman was indeed on a grand jury at the courthouse, but not the Watergate one. They thanked her and left. The episode had whetted their interest. They knew the outlines of the information they needed, but they lacked the details. A cooperative grand juror could probably supply. That afternoon, Bernstein called the chief prosecutor, Earl Silbert, and asked for a list of the 23 grand jurors. Silbert flatly refused, rejecting Bernstein's contention that the membership of the jury was a matter of public record. Woodward asked a friend at the clerk's office if it was possible to get the roster of the Watergate grand jury. No way whatsoever, he was told. The records are secret. Next morning, Woodward took a cab to the courthouse. The clerk's office employed about 90 people. Woodward started at one end of the large complex of file rooms. After half an hour, had found someone willing to direct him to a remote corner of the main file area where lists of trial and grand juries were kept. He identified himself to another clerk as a Post reporter, said he wanted to look through the file. The clerk looked at Woodward suspiciously. Okay, he said, but you aren't allowed to copy anything. You can't take names, no notes. I'll be watching. Woodward started going through the file drawers and finally found the master list of 1972 grand juries. 2 grand juries had been sworn in at the beginning of June. He remembered that the foreman of the Watergate grand jury had an Eastern European name and worked for the government as an economist or something like that. He found the right name on the grand jury number 1 sworn in on June 5th, 1972. Each one of the jurors had filled out a small orange card listing name, age, occupation, address, home, and work telephones. Woodward began sifting through the cards and glanced over his shoulder. The clerk was sitting at his desk about 15 feet away, staring at him. Woodward took the first 4 cards, set them face up at the bottom of the file drawer, and began studying the names, ages, addresses, phone numbers, and occupations. It took him about 10 minutes to memorize the information. He asked the clerk where the men's room was. Inside the washroom, went into the stall, took a notebook from his jacket pocket, and wrote out what he had memorized. Priscilla L. Woodruff, age 28, unemployed. Trying to visualize what each grand juror looked like helped him keep track of the information. Naomi R. Williams, 56, retired teacher and elevator operator. Julie L. White, 37, janitor at George Washington University. Woodward drew a mental picture of a coat of arms and the name Alderman etched beneath a pair of crossed daggers guarding a throne. George W. Stockton, he wrote in his notebook, Institute of Heraldry, Department of the Army, technician, age 53. He hitched up his trousers, bore down, 19 to go. He memorized the next 5 cards, straining not to look guilty. He asked the clerk where the chief's judge chambers were. The man frowned. You're sure spending a lot of time with those files. I'm not sure you're allowed to even look in there. Woodward said he would be back as soon as he had checked something with the chief judge. Upstairs in the 3rd floor washroom, he wrote down the 5 names and other information. That left 14. At the rate he was going, the job would take all morning. On the 3rd try, he was able to memorize 6 cards, returning from the laboratory to the file room. He asked the clerk when he went to lunch. I don't go to lunch, the man said curtly. The perfect clerk. Woodward thought ruefully, even eats at his desk. He needed to get the rest this time because the clerk was getting impatient. It took nearly 45 minutes to memorize the last 8 names and accompanying details. But at the office, he typed a list of the jury members and the accompanying data. In Bradley's office, the editors and Bernstein and Woodward eliminated nearly half of the members of the grand jury as too risky. Low-grade civil servants, especially older ones, for instance, were accustomed to doing things by the bureaucratic book, checking with their superiors, rarely relying on their own judgment. Military officers the same. They were looking for the few least likely to inform the prosecutors of a visit. The candidates would have to be bright enough to suspect that the grand jury system had broken down in the Watergate case, and also be in command of the nuances of the evidence. Ideally, the jurors would be capable of outrage at the White House, or the prosecutors, or both. Persons accustomed to bending rules, who valued practicality more than procedure, the exercise continued with Bernstein, Woodward, and their bosses trying to psych out strangers on the basis of name, address, age, occupation, ethnic background, religion, income level. The final choices were left to the reporters. Everyone in the room had private doubts about such a seedy venture. Bradley, desperate for a story and reassured by lawyers, overcame his own. Simons doubted out loud the righteousness of the exercise and worried about the paper. Rosenfeld was concerned most about keeping the enterprise secret. Sussman was afraid that one of them, probably Bernstein, would push too hard and find a way to violate the law. Woodward wondered whether there was ever justification for a reporter to entice someone across the line of legality while standing safely on the right side of himself. Bernstein, who vaguely approved of the selective civil disobedience, was not concerned about breaking the law in the abstract. It was a question of which law, and he believed that the grand jury proceedings should be inviolate. The misgivings, however, were unstated. For the most part, the reporter's procedure would be to identify themselves, tell a juror that they had learned from an anonymous mutual acquaintance that he or she knew something about Watergate, and ask if he or she was willing to discuss the matter. They would leave unless the juror, without prodding, volunteered something. Nothing would be said about the grand jury unless the juror mentioned it. Bradley, addressing them in a final briefing before... What the heck is that word? Bivouac. Repeated the marching orders. No strong-arm tactics, fellas, right? Working separately, over the weekend of December 2nd and 3rd, Woodward and Bernstein attempted the clumsy charade with about half-dozen members of the grand jury. They returned with no information and a clear impression that the prosecutors had warned the jurors to beware of jokers bearing press cards. Only one person volunteered that he was on the grand jury, and he explained to Woodward that he had taken 2 oaths of secrecy in his life, the Elks and the grand jurors, and that both were sacred trusts. The others said they didn't know anything about Watergate, except what they had learned from the media. One told Bernstein, Watergate, oh yeah, that fancy apartment down in Foggy Bottom. I heard about it on the television, all the break-in business and stuff. There's no place safe in the city. Until he heard about the Elk, Bernstein had feared that his partner, with the fantastic memory, had wasted it on the wrong list. On Monday, Bradley called the reporters into his office for an urgent meeting. He shut the door, a gesture often reserved for such delicate matters of state as firings. The balloon is up, he said. At least one of the grand jurors had told the prosecutors he'd been visited by a Washington Post reporter. One of the prosecutors had called Edward Bennett Williams, the Post principal attorney. The prosecutors had gone to the judge, John Sirica, with the juror's complaint, and Williams advised Bradley to have his reporters sit tight. They asked Bradley how much trouble Williams thought they were in. You're not going to get an award, said Bradley. Williams said that it's up. Continued on page 186. Up to the judge, but Bradley was worried. Sirica, the chief judge of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, was known as Maximum John because of the stiff punishments he imposed. Late in the afternoon, Bradley told the reporters to be in Williams' office at 9 in the morning. Things look a little better, he said. Williams talked to Sirica and to the prosecutors. He thinks he can keep you two out of the slam. Perhaps that's a good place to stop. There are many more pages. And I'm getting a little tired and a little thirsty, so I will continue this at another time. This is stuff I've never heard before. I must look for the other issue that has the first part. Anyway, thanks for coming and enjoying this bit of wisdom and article out of Indeed. June 1974, Playboy. Behold. And yeah, we'll do more of this, but not right now. Thanks for coming. Have a lovely day. Bye for now.